Welcome back, fellow Armchair Generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. We're in real trouble, particularly in Norway, but we got some real troubles going on. We're going to see if we can manage it. Just hit the button for additional African recruits. I thought I was going to get some more, decision, some more basic African militia, and this popped up. The 10th or the 8th and 10th Indian infantry divisions was the 8th was division of the Indian Army, which specialized in tactics and operations in mountain territory. The Indian 10th Infantry Division, too many eyes, was an infantry division of the Indian Army formed during World War II. In 4 years, the division traveled over 4,000 miles from Tehran to Trieste and fought 3 small wars and 2 great campaigns: the Anglo-Iraqi War, the invasion of Syria-Lebanon, Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran, North African campaign, and the Italian campaign. Great. Okay, good. So where did they show up? As I think I've said before. Too far. There we are. Okay. Let's give them a leader. A reasonably good one, but let's see here. This guy here, take a while for them to get fully fleshed out. Yeah, okay, and we have decent colonial militia, colonial infantry type unit. Good. Sending up a few more armored divisions to the front will take a while to get there. But I don't think we're in serious trouble, but we now have a we have these guys here. They're intercepting this region. A little bigger, there we go. They're not well organized because they just got here, but hopefully they will shoot up the Italian Air Force some. So now we face some real tough opponents in the German Army, the Afrika Korps. That's one of our increased difficulties. The other one is the Japanese invasion. Oh, God. I'm going to go look this up. I think I should know it. Sorry, I'm looking this up, but I'm letting the tape roll. Borneo? Try not to do this while I'm playing because one, I should know these things. Yeah, Borneo. Okay. God, I thought it was Borneo, but I just was having sort of a bit of a block. The invasion of Borneo, which has a fair amount of resources. Oil here, particularly. Some up here. We want to deny to Japan. We've got this temporarily, which just means we don't have it at the moment, but they can't ship it out while we hold. There, we're holding this here with our garrison unit. We have a fleet moving east. Oh, still. Yeah, here it's coming. Transport unit to ship some forces over. So, like I say, we're having not a crisis of survival for everything, but I decided to counterattack here after I realized that we aren't going to be able to build a port up here in any time respectful, and there is no land mass way to get up to there. I think it's here or somewhere up here was where the... No, whatever. But I don't think we're going to be successful. And I can't think of a good way to do that, so we're going to go out fighting as best we can. Okay, we don't need energy. We're just waiting for... So if you're at all learning, don't do this. Should have evacuated out instead of try to hold out. Maybe moved up here and try to hold out against the Finns, but these aren't even doing any good, so we're going to stop that. Okay, air-launched torpedoes. Good. That means our many now air and seaplane types are improved, with as well as those that are going after shipping, which is most excellent. And no, I don't rightly think we're going to kick those guys back out. It's a lost cause. Okay, another battle out here. Good. So we've secured our headquarters. These guys. Okay, there. No major defeat. Yeah. Well, these guys are just going to die because we can't get them supplies. I'm not going to try to air supply them out. Come up here because we don't even have an airport here. And try to, just a mess. That's a mess. Yep, I made a mistake there. I do that once in a while. Tarawa garrison. Oh. Didn't know we were having a battle out here. It happened very quickly or something. I didn't know we were having a battle out here. Not much we could do about defending out here any more than light garrison forces that we have somewhere out here. I thought I had a few of them. Yeah, like that. Oh, it's this weird sort of where the map wraps around. Far East Command here. I'm going to leave that to the Americans or Australians to do something about out in the Pacific. Well, if the game continues and we get everything else cleaned up, sure, if it hasn't cleaned it up by that amount of time. I could have withdrawn from there in enough time, I think. But we're going to stop that. We're going to attack. Yeah, let's attack her. Just mostly wanted to kill the unit. Oh, infantry getting advanced. Don't know that. Depends on what you think that represents, but yeah. Don't want to push further than 42. Move security, well. With heavy guns. But what else is advanced tank optics? It must have been. And it doesn't show up as I look down on the list. No, we don't want to continue that. And let's do armored fighting vehicle AA weapons. Mostly machine guns, just pointing in the air, but an improvement's nice. I'm going to have you attack to there. Cut off their retreat. So that's going fine, it just that gonna have to happen. They're attacking us. We're gonna send Montgomery back into battle. These guys back in. Yeah. Hopefully that'll be enough. How are we doing in India? They're also mostly just cleanup duty. It would have been an interesting What? Oh, we're just winning the defensive battle still. Somehow. An interesting concept if the British had tried to, and since we're sort of playing Churchill's war, he definitely wanted to hold. I don't know what he thought. I haven't really read, quite honestly, what he thought. If Britain at all would have been able to have held India. You know, I don't think there's too many Indians. I've corresponded with a few who have played Hearts of Iron on some of these issues. Don't know if there's too many watching this series, but... And one of them talked about how some of the famines that happened in India were... I was sort of stating from just my understanding, not any great knowledge of them, that they were sort of somewhere between natural disasters on the one hand and commercial agricultural policies on the other, particularly in growing of poppies instead of growing food, that caused the famines and were sort of not intended. You know, Britain didn't go out, oh, we want to cause a big famine of Indians and trying to depopulate them, or you know, do something particularly trying to be abusive. He was arguing, probably with much more knowledge than I have, I'll grant, because I'm not trying to propagandize anybody here if there's better knowledge, but this was based on some documentaries that I'd seen, and of course they're English language, so they have certain sympathies towards Britain on the subject, I'm sure. So and there were sort of the Bengal, the Madras, I think is what it was, and this is the Bombay, for quite some time, and establishments in India that were those were, at least I know from a military and governmental perspective for quite some time, were three sort of different entire colonies with different leaders on top of them that were pursuing different policies. And then over time they were more consolidated and centralized. By this time, much more consolidated and centralized. Now, this is a grossly wrong and inadequate map of India at the time, because there were lots of these kind of things, like Bhutan here, that were princely states. Some were, I'm not going to say like micro-states like, well, they may have been, Liechtenstein, but they were small states like Luxembourg or whatever. Some were really small. Others were fairly large. You know, they were, you know, things like this kind of size or Bhutan size mixed in here. And that were, so long as they were sort of behaved themselves, they governed themselves. So they were internally governed. Often these were Muslim princes governing over Hindu populations. And of course you have, I think, Jainist religion down here, and you have various ethnic groups. You have the Muslims over here in Bangladesh, what becomes Bangladesh, and then becomes in Pakistan over here. But you also have very large Muslim populations scattered throughout India, and you can look at, and it was on both sides. It wasn't just Hindus on Muslims, though that was sort of some of the largest, because I think death tolls, because they were spread out around India and in smaller pockets. But there was also, I don't know who, if any, one side can be clearly started it. Muslim violence against Hindus, and that were intermixed. So British rule, in my opinion, overall, was a good thing for India. Now, as I've said before in various, when I've touched the topic, partially as I'm thinking about this, you know, grant independence, and we're dealing with the rebellions here. So yes, you can talk about various bad incidents, and shall we say the Gandhi period, where some local British commander shoots a bunch of unarmed people. I do believe that happened several times. I don't know that the deaths were more than in the hundreds. Now, you can easily say one is too many. I'm not going to argue if any numbers are fine, but a few hundred deaths on the scale of India is on the scale of India, that's nothing. We can talk about the larger famines and other things that may or may not have happened with they happened, but whether they happened or didn't happen as designed by British policy, as opposed to unintended consequences because of the policy and nature going on and things like that. We can talk about that, but for the most part, I would say the violence traditionally by the British towards the Indians was against the warriors, the fighting, which was to some degree a caste, was a caste system in, not some degree, it was a caste system in India, and they were fought on those basis. Where if you look at like the Indian Mutiny that happened, and I read some books on it, including some historical fiction, and it just enrages me when I read it. And some of the stuff is 20th century, and they're sort of taking a 20th century, I think, realistic view of it, but they are recounting it, and where the Indian mutineers would rise up, and they slaughtered the English families, and I just find that horrific. And it isn't just the situation, because the descriptions of them sneaking up on and attacking the bungalows where they lived, of like the local officers. And not that they're just killing the British officers that ruled over them. That's an act of rebellion. I'm not condoning it, but it's an act. But they also specifically targeted the families there as well, and targeted families where there were no officers, where there were just governmental employees or others, or known that the husbands were away, that were the officers, and they killed the wives and the children that were there, targeted them. And so, remember, I'm an American of Scottish and English descent, so I'm culturally aligned with the British, but we also fought for our independence from them. But we didn't go around as a general policy. We can look at a few cases, but they're so few that they stand out incredibly. Of where the Americans were targeting women and children. Not that they didn't get in the way and die, they did in war, but were targeted as such. During our fight for independence, we didn't do anything like that, and so that's why I look at the Indian Mutiny not so much as a reasonable independence war, and I don't know how much that was independence versus just cultural conflict or other things. We can look into that. But because of that, and then there was definitely a reaction by the British at the end of that Indian Mutiny, in which they very brutally executed large batches of Indians. But this is a reaction, not, in my opinion, primarily to a mutiny of troops or a rebellion. I would have been harsh anyways, but it was to the brutality shown to the British, and as the British understood it and taught by their actions, generally not targeting non-combatants. So, and if you want to argue, if you're Indian, and a lot of them may still do so, including those that have something of a Western education, that the caste system is good and appropriate, I don't. you can talk about a lot of in our modern sense of the world with class distinctions, racial distinctions or racism in Europe and other places. You look at India with its caste system, it may not be racial, but it's, in my opinion, just as horrific. It doesn't quite get up to the level of slavery for the most part, but the caste system is bad, and had you not had British rule, you would have had even a more rigid caste system than you do today, more legally codified caste system. So just on that Enlightenment element that Britain brought to India, I think is a good thing. So you have to look at it, and I do, when I take all this stuff, I look at it in many contexts. So if Britain hadn't been as bankrupt, I think we really have to look at it as defeated, more or less, in World War II, in many ways. And if not defeated, yeah, they were sort of victorious, but it was mainly because the U.S. was there. That they were actually victorious in that they conquered, not that they survived, but without the U.S., they, at some point, at some stage, you know, I don't know, well, maybe if the Soviets would have defeated the Germans, and I doubt that without the Americans as well. If the Soviets had fallen at some point, the British may have had to negotiate some sort of ceasefire with Germany. So, but had they had the ability moving into the 20th century to economically try to maintain the British Empire, particularly India, I wonder how well they could have done it, because you would have had a lot of princely states that might have wanted to maintain its power. You could have the divide and rule element and the peacekeeping element between the different religious, ethnic, there's various ethnic groups within India. And you also have the Sikh situation, and they're around in here somewhere. You have a lot of that you could show a good, as well as just the general modernizing in a physical sense of India. I mean, they're building, you know, railroads have been going for some considerable time, but continuing electrification and all of these other elements that had Britain done a few fundamental things different, I think they could have held on to it. Now, of course, also I want to say, we were talking, you know, it's bankrupt, it's nearly defeated, and the British Empire is fractured in that Australia, New Zealand, Canada, not so much that they just had localized governments. They were more and more functionally independent governments, and to the situation that you weren't going to be sending battalions of Canadian or Australian troops to help occupy India. So you had the fractured situation of the British Empire by this time. And this gets into the element of one of the fundamental things that Britain didn't, I'm giving a lecture on this now, that didn't learn with the American colonies breaking away. One of the fairly big supporters of the British Empire at the time of the American colonies was a guy named Benjamin Franklin. He raised his son to be a pro-British person, but he was also an American. He saw himself as a Welshman might see himself, or a Scotsman might see himself, as part of of Britain, as a Britain, but of a different flavor, shall we say. But where the British looked on them as colonials, and not just, and that has its own sort of context to it, but sort of the colonies, sort of as they might look upon as some Jamaica or some other place, in that they were just, and which was different with Jamaica or a lot of these other islands, a lot of the British that came out to these places were out there for 10 or 20 years, then went home. For various reasons, they did that, and they were sort of not a lasting legacy for most Britons that moved to this part of the world. They were purely a commercial colony, where up here in the Americas there were definitely commercial colonial elements to it. And, you know, we can think of the tobacco and other growth products down in the south, but they were also a, you know, homesteading, a colonization, much deeper roots elements to it that set up. And the Britons really didn't, you know, and if you look at the original Virginia Charter here, they were given all rights as British subjects, all the people in the British Virginia colonies that moved there, and all their descendants for in perpetuity, that they were British citizens. What they needed to recognize, and so, well, get back to Franklin. He was at a meeting before a committee on Parliament. I don't think it was all of Parliament, but a committee or something. And he walked in a Briton and walked out an American. Just the way they treated him at that one, and he had been for a long time a sort of a resident in London as a representative of various colonial interests in London for Britain, sort of as a, you know, somewhat of a diplomat, somewhat as a mercantile type person. So he had been there for a long time, and a real fixture, and a quite well-known one, like he later became in Paris when he was down there. But he was there, and just the way the British government treated him, and not just him as a person, and because I don't think that was so atrocious, I don't know what was said, but just sort of treated the whole prospect of America and the idea that the Britons living in America would have any say over what happened in Britain was just an anathema to them, basically, is how I would put it. They should have learned from this once the American colonies left, that when you had a colonial situation, you needed to make them part of the governance system. And not just as they had been. There was various elected bodies. Some of the governors were sort of locally elected, I believe, and it varied from colony to colony, by various councils. I don't think there was any like a presidential election, but, you know, elected amongst the local council or whatever. And then other ones were royal governors that were appointed by Britain. It varied from the different colonial charters in both what became the independent American colonies, as well as Canada and, you know, down in here, the Caribbean. So it varied from area to area. But not just in that they participate in their local governance, but that they had a say, just like the Welsh and the Scots. It depends on where you are and what's going on, how much the Irish had a say in it, but let's stick with the Welsh and the Scots. Just like they had a say in the British Parliament. So had they, not just 5 minutes before the Declaration of Independence was voted on and signed, but had they 20 years before that, just Virginia send two members of Parliament. Massachusetts send 2 members to Parliament. Something like New Jersey, send a member to Parliament. New York's colony, a member or 2 to Parliament. Send a few members of these, not anywhere equal to the idea of like one man, one vote. Now, here there were rotten boroughs and all kinds of things where there were 12 people that were allowed to vote for a particular borough, and you can get into all this stuff. But just simply that you had a few American members voting in Parliament, even if they weren't, 10, 20 people out of the, North American colonies, that probably alone would have stopped the American Revolution and kept it just some sort of local flare-up that would have been of a colonial nature that would have been put down very rapidly, because there would have been real representation. Britain didn't learn from that. It didn't learn that lesson that the Romans did. Now, the Romans took it to the other extreme, in which they something like Marcus Aurelius' time or whatever. Eventually, all free persons in the Roman Empire were made Roman citizens. So it basically made Roman citizenship nothing special about it. So whatever, diluted it and diluted the identity of it. But had Britain tried to give both the idea of regional governments out here and that they sort of locally govern themselves, partially because of distance and travel times, but also partially just because they're local, like you have local councils in most places in the world, but that are a bit of a federal system, so that they have fewer votes per population and other things, but that they still have some votes. And had they done that in Canada, had they done that in places like Australia and New Zealand, and had they picked out a few colonial enclaves in which, just within the enclaves, set up, including locals, Indians, not even the necessarily majority of them, but a significant number of them, and I mean in the thousands or tens of thousands, that you set up voting populations that sent members that would, yes, be brown-skinned Indians to the British Parliament. And again, you don't do that 5 minutes before the independence, but you do that a few generations before. And I'm not suggesting all of India or anything like that. I'm suggesting a few key places. And do that similarly in places like South Africa and Rhodesia, where you had in Kenya, that you would have had these elements of the British Empire established. They would have a voice in London. They would have a certain level of local governance, and I'm sure it would vary from area to area, that I think you could have kept the British Empire together. Now, that's just maybe me and my viewpoints in history and not understanding rise of nationalism, the spread of modern communications and everything like that. That very well may be, but I still think that it could have been done. But Britain didn't learn that lesson. And that's why it was going to fail no matter what over India, even if World War I and World War II did not exhaust Britain, because they didn't take some of these basic remedial elements. They couldn't have held India indefinitely. But India was not conquered by large masses of armies. India was conquered by good governance. This is, again, gets back to my idea that Britain brought good governance to India, and the people appreciated it over the caprices, the whims, the ongoing wars between different princely states. In India wasn't really much of an idea of a nation state at all. It was a continent, sort of like saying, oh, Europe, and have a united Europe government. I mean, yeah, they're sort of trying that right now, but there wasn't that identity, and that's part of what let Britain in, that there wasn't that identity that a person over here in Bengal didn't identify with a person over here in Hyderabad area, Pakistan. So even though they were both Muslim, in the 18th century or whatever, they were foreigners to each other, and sometimes they may have spoke the same language or a similar language, so they were still foreigners, so they didn't care. There wasn't that kind of thing. So let's play a little more. Okay. Yeah, the Germans are attacking us. Well, what's our... So we're still sending over... the ship, but it'll be a while, so we'll send them there. Those that are somewhat new to the series know that I Oh, these guys are attacking up here. Oh, retreat into there. We're gonna die here. Yeah, we're gonna die here. Oh well, I made a mistake. No, I like to examine these various historical questions and ideas. Well, let's stop this. It ain't gonna get built in time. Not to move supplies into it. Thought I was sending over the ships to here. Did they die? Could have. All those. Should use those to pull them out instead of moved in that armored division. Well, let's go to see if we can get these guys out. Yeah. Well, our Norwegian campaign didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. Guess I can try to take solace in hopefully all these divisions that are here. Killing me here. All of these guys. All of these are here fighting up in Norway instead of fighting in the Soviet Union, which could have meant a difference there maybe, so maybe that's good in that sense. Okay, well, I think we're going to risk this. Well, we'll do that next episode. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Please post your comments. Love hearing from you. See you later for more Hearts of Iron.